Hey everyone, so I'm going to do the study notes for First Thessalonians, and I had already recorded the first chapter. So let's start with First Thessalonians, and these are, again, just the study notes. It's not scripture, but it helps give some context kind of before getting into the scripture, into the text. So First and Second Thessalonians comprise some of the earliest New Testament writings. The first epistle was penned at Corinth by the Apostle Paul in a response to Timothy's report on the progress of the church that they'd recently established there. Paul, along with Silas and Timothy, founded the church at Thessalonica on his second missionary journey. The apostle had been drawn to this important Roman port after seeing a vision in which a Macedonian man was calling for help. The city, Thessalonica, Salonika today, had been named in 315 BC by Cassander after his wife Alexander the Great's half-sister. Under the Romans, the city, famous for its hot springs, burgeoned to a population of over 200,000. It was situated strategically on the Via Egnatia, the main Roman highway from east to west. Its sheltered harbor was made an ideal naval station. The city was a natural center for traffic moving in all directions. In Paul's day, it was the capital of Macedonia. Although the provincial governor was headquartered there, he exercised no authority over Thessalonica. As a free city, it was ruled by politarchs and enjoyed political autonomy. As a military and commercial center, Thessalonica became famous for its wealth as well as its vice, attracting a strange mixture of Roman high society and pagan sensuality. See Acts 17:4, 1 Thessalonians 4:1-8. It also attracted merchants from other parts of the empire, including numerous Jews, Acts 17:4. The nucleus of the church was formed from this group of Jews, although 1 Thessalonians 1:9 indicates that the apostle to the Gentiles had his greatest success among the non-Jewish peoples of the city, Acts 17:4. The church. In Europe, Paul and his companions had first gone to Philippi, Acts 16:12, where they established a church and were miraculously delivered from the jail. Leaving Philippi, they traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia. Some of these words are difficult. To Thessalonica. Going first to the Jewish synagogue, Paul there won his first converts and met his most serious opposition. His ministry in the city lasted less than a month, and during that time he worked as a tent maker, not wishing to burden the fledgling assembly with his needs, and spent the balance of his time at the home of Jason, organizing the new believers into a church. But almost immediately the Jews brought Paul before the politarchs and had him expelled from the city. He went on to Berea, meeting great initial success, but was again opposed by the Thessalonian Jews, who dogged his trail and incited the people to riot against him. Paul barely escaped with his life, traveling to Athens, where his message was received with little enthusiasm. From Athens, Paul dispatched Timothy to check on the situation in the Thessalonian church, chapter 3, verse 2. Occasion and purpose. After all this persecution and rejection of the gospel, Paul came to Corinth, Acts 18:1, in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. In Corinthians 2:3, when Silas and Timothy returned bearing good news about the Macedonian churches, Paul was greatly encouraged and pressed forward with his work, Acts 18:4-5. But the Thessalonians were also reportedly having difficulties. Gentiles and especially Jews were impugning Paul's sincerity and defaming him as a wandering charlatan who had deceived them. The church was also somewhat confused by the second coming of Christ. Some members worried about believers who had died before his return. Others considered it unnecessary to continue working since Christ would return at any time. Still others were sinking back into the immorality of the culture. There was also a crisis in the leadership. Many of the rank and file apparently were being offended by certain tactless elders. These and other minor difficulties occasioned Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians. The time of writing. Since this epistle was certainly written during Paul's long stay at Corinth, Acts 18:5, 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 6, the date can easily be fixed. An inscription discovered at Delphi, dated from the summer of AD 52, refers to the preconsulate of Gallio, a position held for only 2 years. Paul arrived at Corinth before Gallio assumed this position, perhaps a year earlier. Thus, the time of the writing of 1 Thessalonians must have been in the summer or fall of AD 51. Then there's an outline here of 1 Thessalonians. There's the greeting in chapter 1, verse 1, a prayer of thanksgiving in chapter 1, verse 2 to 4. And then Paul's ministry at Thessalonica is in chapter 1, verses 5 to chapter 2, verse 16. And in that, there's the reception of the gospel and the character of Paul's ministry. Then there is Paul's relations with the Thessalonians, and that goes from chapter 2, verse 17 to chapter 3, verse 13. And in there, we have Paul's desire to return, Paul's joy in the Thessalonians, Timothy's mission to them, Timothy's report, Paul's satisfaction, and Paul's prayer. Then Paul's exhortation to Christian living is in chapter 4, verses 1 to 12, which has general exhortations, sexual purity, brotherly love, earning one's living. Then Paul's instruction on the second coming is in chapter 4, verses 13 to 5, verse 11, the people, the time, and the challenge. And then we have Paul's final charge in chapter 5, verses 12 to 22, and the conclusion in chapter 5, verses 23 to 28. So, although boring, maybe, it's one of those things that these kind of study notes give us a bit of the history and context so we can understand that this epistle, this letter of Paul to the Thessalonians, it wasn't written directly to you or I. It was written to a specific people at a certain period of time in a certain culture. And understanding that can then allow us to understand the context of why Paul was writing to Timothy and the content of this letter. So my next video will be chapters 2 and 3 of 1 Thessalonians.